Good evening and welcome to the December meeting of the Burlington Electric Commission. It's always held right here, generally speaking. Second Wednesday of the month, 5 o'clock, 585 Pine. And as always, the public ratepayers, welcome to come down and join the conversation. First thing we'll start with is the agenda. Are there any changes, additions, subtractions to the agenda? I have one. The only thing with the board's indulgence to switch the McNeil budget with the overview of the DOE grant, so we can get Rodney out of here to get home. So just be swapping those two out. Other than that, anything? Anybody? Great. Second item on our agenda is the minutes of the November 13th, 2024 meeting. Are there any changes or corrections or anything other than stuff that would just be simple typos and stuff like that? Any substantive changes? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes?
I have a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those disagree with it say nay. Ayes have it. Motion minutes passed. Item number 3 on the agenda tonight is public forum. This is a chance for those in-house or online to be heard by the board. Is there anybody here to be heard for a public forum? I see none. Again, second Wednesday of the month, right here, 585 Pine. Come on down, drop in online, drop in, let us hear what you have to say. We appreciate it. All right, next up, item number 4, Commissioner's Corner. Are there any items that commissioners have for that's sort of been on your mind or happened in the last month or so that since we met? I have one thing or a couple things.
Yeah, I do too. First of all, thank you, Emily, for following up on the conversation of last week with the additional data and information. So that was super useful. And then I was also curious, we can talk about it at the end, but we did get that email about the PUC decision.
Yeah, that's the one I want to discuss in a second.
Okay.
Are there any other? So, Mr. Porter sent us a document from the PUC, and in that document, some of the, I'm not one that reads those sorts of things all the time and with all the legalese and everything, but it does seem to suggest some, not so great app behavior or whatever by the department, which I don't really believe is the case in accounting-wise, whatever. But especially since we just got a clean audit from the good folks at KPMG. So, looking at that wording on there and not really understanding it from a layperson's point of view, and it was brought to our attention, I have asked General Manager Springer to explain that document to us and just give us some context around it so that we understand what's being said there. And so that I'd give you the floor.
No, thank you for that opportunity. Just remind the Commission that Pike Porter is a litigant against us in a related matter with the IRP. What he forwarded to you is a proposal for a decision by a hearing officer. It's not actually a decision by the Commission. We would be within our rights to contest that or argue for a different result. So it's not actually a decision by the Commission, but it is a proposal for decision by a hearing officer. But let me contextualize what we're actually talking about. It is related to what's called TEPF funds, thermal energy process fuel. When I got to Burlington Electric back in 2017, we consistently lost hundreds of thousands of dollars a year as an organization, and our ratepayers lost that money to Efficiency Vermont because we didn't have the opportunity to spend the money in Burlington because TEPF funds, which comprise money that we get from being a state that's part of the RGGI program and bidding efficiency into the forward capacity market. So two non-ratepayer revenue streams that aren't direct ratepayer revenue streams. We as a state get those monies and then they're allocated to the efficiency utilities, so us and Efficiency Vermont. We were losing that because you could only spend the money on unregulated fuel customers. And as the Commission knows, 95+% of Burlington is served by a regulated fuel, which is gas. So we have consistently tried to target that money towards the limited number of oil, propane, or wood fuel customers that we have. And we have programs for weatherization. We have programs to support the modular homes, the net zero modular homes for the North Avenue Co-op, for example. We have different programs within this bucket that are offered. We consistently failed to meet those targets because we don't have a market, frankly, for those in Burlington. So when I got to BED, we looked at this, and as a ratepayer and as a member of the team, I said, this is not right that we're losing those funds. We should find a way to dedicate them to purposes that serve our customers. So went to the legislature in the 2018-2019 timeframe, and we had legislation that was passed that said that you can use these monies now to support district energy feasibility work. And that's what we did. That's how we funded phase 1, 2, and 3 of the feasibility work. And that work obviously came to completion in 2023. And we would have to plan there's a 3-year cycle for these funds. You plan and say, we think we're going to spend this much on this and this much on that. So we were spending through the district energy money in 2023, and we realized we were going to go past where we had planned to be. And so we go to the commission and we say, okay, well, we have additional TEPF monies in this bucket that we don't believe we're going to spend. We'd like to put it into the district energy bucket. And they said at the time, no, we don't want to let you do that because we think we want to keep the money in case there's uptake on these other programs for the unregulated fuel customers. And we said, okay. So we waited. There wasn't uptake. We did spend the district energy money. And we went back this year and said, would you allow us to do a transfer? So this is about reimbursement from which account. It's not about whether the spending is appropriate. I want to be really clear. It's about where should the spending be reimbursed from or which account should it be in. And they said, and you know, we don't agree with this, obviously, or we wouldn't have advanced it, but the proposal for decision said, well, we don't think it's timely that you brought it now. You should have made some of these arguments back in 2023, and for other reasons, we're not planning to allow you to have it reimbursed. Now, the other thing is we went to the legislature alongside Efficiency Vermont in 2020 and in 2023 and got additional authorization to spend TEPF money through what's called Act 151 and Act 44. So all of our EV and heat pump incentive programs now include spending from TEPF, which is a relatively new thing. Our geothermal well testing program is funded this way. And so whether or not the money gets reimbursed for district energy, the TEPF money, because of this legislation that we've pursued, will be put to good purpose for Burlington ratepayers through incentives and other programs. So the idea that there's anything like inappropriate is completely wrong and lacks context. It's really about, okay, was this planned? Was it approved ahead of time? Are you allowed to reimburse it from this bucket or that bucket? But the good news is one way or another, those dollars will go to Burlington ratepayers for good purpose. And I also want to mention, in addition to the chair mentioning what we've had, obviously, clean, unmodified opinions for our audits, we have had every single penny of every rate case that we've brought since 2021 has been approved at the PUC. And in fact, I believe, was it filed today by the DPS, that our current rate case, our request for 5.5%, is being supported by the Department of Public Service. Again, speaks to the exemplary work of our finance team, our policy and planning team, in making sure that when we're requesting funds through a rate case, that we are fully justified in doing so. If there was inappropriate requests, those would be addressed through a rate case. And I don't mean to suggest that if you ever get less than you asked for in a rate case that you did something that was not appropriate. There are sometimes genuine disagreements between the regulator and the utility as to what should go in rates, and it's not uncommon that a utility will have a rate case approved only partially or by a certain point. So it's not to say that that's even a bad thing if it happens, but every single penny from our rate cases over the last several years since we started updating our rates has been approved by the Public Utility Commission. So I really take strong issue, as strong as I possibly could, with the tenor of that email. I think it's completely misinformed and lacks context and is trying to, frankly, just attack the department and doesn't take into account all the good work that our team does, doesn't take into account any context for what these monies are for. So you're grabbing a document from a PUC docket and you're putting it in front of folks who aren't at the PUC docket to say, oh, there's something nefarious here when there in fact is not. So I appreciate the opportunity to walk through the context there. Glad to answer follow-up questions if you have any. But that's kind of what we're looking at with that proposal for a decision, which we haven't really decided what we may or may not do with it, but even if it stands, that's kind of the context for it.
Questions?
Everyone, thank you for that, Taryn. That's helpful. And One thing I wanted to dig in on, though, is a question around, BED operate as a distribution utility operates both the efficiency program and the utility, distribution utility itself. And so, having worked at Efficiency Vermont, VEIC, I understand that, there was only those TEPF and other funds. There was no other place to draw from. And so in this case, the hearing officer does sort of raise this issue and says, an EU that's not also a distribution utility would not have this ability. So can you kind of just speak to the mechanics of this? Because I don't understand that, only having worked in the one side of it, how it works in this case when you have sort of access, because you are the fiscal agent for the EEC, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah,
So
we are, I should say.
Yeah, so it's true that Efficiency Vermont, for example, wouldn't have been able to undertake the district energy feasibility work and been able to fund it without a dedicated funding source. And as a utility, as a distribution utility, we have the ability to put funding towards projects or incentive programs, different things, through a variety of different channels, not limited to the TPF and EEC. We funded the vast bulk of the district energy work through TEPF, mainly for the reason that we couldn't put those funds towards anything else, particularly at the time. Now that we have Act 151 and its successor, Act 44, there's much more flexibility between the TEPF funds going to different things. So I'm not concerned about this, only in the sense that we're not going to lose out on those funds. They're not going to revert to the state or revert to Efficiency Vermont. They're part of our carry forward. We will dedicate them to our efficiency or electrification programs as needed. It's possible, even given the carry forward that we have, we may be able to bolster some of our programs if and when the federal government decides to do something about federal incentives that's counteracts some of the work that we're trying to do here in Burlington on electrification. So having some flexibility within TPF is generally a good thing. But it's true, as a distribution utility, we can undertake staff time and resource work to scope a variety of projects, whether it's battery storage, whether it's district heat, whether it's work at McNeil. Like, for example, we're doing work, and I'll talk about it more in the update, but we're doing work on McNeil innovation projects and RFPs. We don't need the TPF to fund that because we're a distribution utility and we're resourced to essentially do that work.
Got it.
Yep.
And then follow up, if I may. Sorry. So what happens if this doesn't get, if this isn't approved ultimately?
Well, so we have this is kind of in the past in a way.
Right.
This was work that completed in 2023. So it's not, and Emily, welcome to maybe join if you'd like to kind of get into the details, but it's not something that's part of our budget for this current fiscal year. Or something that we assumed as part of our budget for the fiscal year. So there's no kind of fiscal impact that I anticipate from this for FY '25. So this is spending that already occurred, already was paid for. It's just a question of whether we could pull it reimbursement from TEPF or whether it would stay within sort of the general operating environment.
Okay.
If I'm characterizing that fairly.
Yeah, so the FY '24 audited financial results that we just walked through last month, that bottom line includes this amount showing up as expense in BED's financial statement. If the order, if the PUC had decided in our favor, which it looks like they're not going to, our expenses would still have been 330-something thousand higher in FY '24. Those results would stand as they are, and then we would just move cash from the EEU account to the operating account, and that would be it. Those expenses would just be a little higher than otherwise they would have been in 2024. The other thing we'll have to do is the rate case we just filed. We file a rate case based on the most recent audited year as kind of the baseline, the test year. So the rate case we just filed in June was based on FY '23. If we are to file, if we decide that we need a rate request next year, that would be based on audited FY '24. We would subtract out that 330,000-ish of extra district energy expense that hit BED's own financial statement as opposed to the EEU financial statement. We'd subtract that out from our cost of service, because that's not built in, we don't want that built into the rates.
It's not an ongoing
It's not an
expense.
ongoing expense. It was a one-time thing that happened, unusual. That's the sort of thing that you adjust as a known and measurable change. So it won't be increasing the rate base going forward, if that makes sense.
Good. Thank you. Yep.
Does that answer your questions as well?
Yeah, I just saw the email and thought we wanted to hear the other side, or put it in context, yeah.
Appreciate that.
We good? Anything else for Commissioner's Corner? All right, moving on to the General Manager update. Back to you
All
on the
right.
floor again. General
Thank
Manager
you.
Springer.
So a couple items related to city council actions. We did go on the 9th to the Board of Finance City Council and got approvals unanimously for the EV charging grant. So Emily in particular is doing a bunch of work with the Department of Transportation to get that obligated either by the end of the month or hopefully early January prior to any changeover in the administration. We are thinking proactively, though, even beyond getting grants obligated, about clawbacks and other things that may happen that were, not maybe anticipated or might not be norms for practice, but could happen. And there may be a benefit to getting some things in inventory, sooner than later, whether it's the EV charging or whether it's the Building Giants grant, portion of which you're going to hear more about later tonight as well. Building Giants is obligated funding. We still have steps to take to roll that out. This EV charging is not obligated yet, but we're working to make it obligated as soon as possible. So good process at council to have that approved. The energy benchmarking ordinance was held over until the 16th, mainly because there was a situation at the University of Vermont where not all of their buildings are metered for thermal loads. They're based on the central plant, and they would be very difficult to benchmark, or they would have to buy meters that I understand could be 20 or 30,000 per building. So there's some language that's proposed for amendment to exempt those unmetered buildings from the benchmarking process, not from the process of ultimately adopting efficiency projects if they're identified as a need in any further policy development, but just this initial step. We've also had calls just over the last few days with Cambridge, with Portland, Maine, with the Institute for Market Transformation, to learn more about the benchmarking process that's going on. There's some unusual aspects to what we're proposing in Burlington in the ordinance. We're going down to 10,000 square feet. I think a lot of cities go higher than that and go down to maybe 20,000 to 25,000. So that's something to consider from a policy standpoint. Also, we're trying to disaggregate space heating load in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is something that can be done, my understanding, but it's not necessarily easy. So there's also software costs and staffing, dedicated staffing in a lot of these other communities, which I doubt that we're going to have the capacity for. So we're just trying to be realistic that while we're committed to making this work and we want to do the benchmarking, there's going to be some challenges, and I know that as soon as it moves forward, there's going to be an additional policy conversation that'll take place, and we want to be conscious of taking these things sort of stepwise and not getting too much loaded up at any one time, not just for us, but really our permitting office as well has to handle the implementation of this. So we're working closely on that. I did send a note that kind of supersedes what I had in here around the McNeil RFPs, because we met as a team again to review. Now, we had 3 responses to the emission reduction RFP, 2 of which were in budget, and 1 was out of budget significantly. And then we had 1 response to the forestry RFP that was also out of budget significantly. So we've asked for reference checks from 2 vendors that were in budget for the emission reduction assessment. We're reviewing those references. We're reviewing the proposed projects. Those 2 were almost identical in cost, and we're hoping to identify a vendor and start scoping a potential scope of work with them in the coming weeks. We've reopened as of today the forestry RFP to see if we can get any additional responses, ideally that are in budget and on point from the qualification standpoint. So given that's going to be open until late January, I think the 24th, I had hoped we would bring all of these RFPs and scopes of work back through the Commission, TUC, and Council for review and approval in January. I think it's more likely going to be in February. So look for it, hopefully, assuming we get responses for the forestry one that are appropriate. look for something hopefully in the February agenda where we'll bring these forward, starting here, and then TUC, and then the City Council, so that we can get that work moving forward.
You can't do one by one, so I was just gonna ask that.
We could, but it would require us to go to individual TUC and council meetings twice, which are not typical, like on our calendars. And we haven't actually identified the vendor yet for the scope of work either for the emission reduction one. So I am anticipating with the holidays that will take, at least a few weeks. So by that point, we're kind of in January, and we'll like to move them as a package if we can. If we can't, if there's no responses or we're not able to advance the forestry one for whatever reason, we would probably bring the emissions reduction one in February either way, but was hoping to do it as a grouping. Wanted to mention, there's a web link here, there's also some media, I think, about this project at McNeil with Village Hydroponics, which is a cool project. They're a nonprofit that's trying to serve in partnership with AALV and the Family Room, members of the New American community, in particular with produce, herbs, all grown indoors. So they have a shipping container at McNeil. They're using a heat pump and some efficient equipment. And we have a site lease with them through the McNeil joint owners. They're paying for their own electricity, their own water. But it's an interesting model from a climate resilience standpoint to have indoor agriculture that way. And it came to us as a partnership from CEDO within the city saying, hey, we have a farm project at the Intervale. There's been some flooding. Would you be willing to consider hosting something at McNeil? I think it just speaks to the ways we can use that site as well as the plant in innovative ways to serve the community that may be outside of the scope of what we would typically think about. So encourage the commission to check out the link here. I think there's going to be a story on WCAX in the near future, and I think there was also a story on VPR just recently. And then also there's been a few events that are of interest. Post-election, I mentioned a couple here, the EAN gathering and the Treasurer's Climate Finance Roundtable. These are, the main message from all of these is get your grants obligated, which obviously we're working to do. There's a lot of uncertainty around federal policy, around the federal government's responsiveness on different things, so we'll be wading through that as will everybody else. One beneficial piece was at the Treasurer's Roundtable, at least, reconnecting with the Municipal Bond Bank, and we're going to have some further conversations with them about whether there's any partnerships we could pursue for future revenue bond issuances, for example, that could lower interest rates for our ratepayers. So nothing to report there just yet. We're going to have a conversation, but that could be an interesting dynamic if we're able to work with them. They have a fairly high credit rating, I understand. Ours is good, theirs is even better. So if there's an opportunity to do something there and it doesn't limit us in any other way, when we're ready to issue the revenue bond, we would look at that as a potential option. I don't anticipate that we're going to be looking to issue really until probably the second half of 2025 calendar year. But Emily's working with PFM, our financial advisor, to kind of monitor some of the interest rate environment around municipal bonds, and we can be responsive as needed, but we still have a good chunk of our existing revenue bond to spend down. The only other thing I was going to mention is not on here. James is working to develop an energy storage RFP. We have entertained a number of conversations around energy storage, various places in the city. There's been discussions about storage in various locations, some which are city property, some of which may be private property. So to get kind of level set with all the potential vendors who are out there and all the projects that are out there, we're looking to issue a storage RFP perhaps in December or maybe early January, and we'll encourage all the interested parties to come in with their projects, and we'd be in a position where we could select one or more projects depending on the economics. So as you know, we don't have a whole lot of storage really of any capacity in the city, certainly no utility scale battery storage that we can draw on for peak reduction and other things. So this could be an exciting opportunity to really add some significant for us megawatts of energy storage, and we're going to look into that. But just wanted to mention it. It's not on the agenda here, but it was a late breaking item today that I thought I'd add, and glad to answer any other questions.
Just had one that's actually goes back to your comment about making sure the funds get allocated and the clawback potential.
Yeah.
Have you, because I'll ask, have you done any kind of risk assessment from the tariff potential Are you worried about that at all? I mean, if you
Yeah.
allocate it and purchase equipment, it should be, and mitigate both, but.
Yeah, the tariff issue could affect us in a variety of ways. I mean, certainly, I think about the price of certain clean energy technologies that we are supportive of and rely on and want our customers to be able to rely on, whether that's solar, lithium ion, other, for a variety of electrification purposes. So there's definitely potential impact there that could slow market adoption. The other kind of thing that I think about would be more on the reliability side, the grid side, things like transformers or other pieces of equipment. We've had some conversations about that in terms of where we're sourcing from and what the impacts might be. But there's been a period of time where you couldn't get anything from anywhere, no matter what, on a reasonable time frame. That's begun to ease a little bit, but this could put some additional headwinds back into that conversation potentially. So early to know what the impacts might be or which tariffs might apply to which, source and at what levels, and how much is just talk or how much may actually get implemented. So it's definitely something we'll have to continually assess.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So, two-parter. First question's about storage, and the second one is about the bond. On the storage side, what's the scale that we're looking at for the RFP in terms of megawatt hours or?
Yeah, what we've talked about pretty consistently is projects that could be up to 5 megawatts in size. And, we've talked about that at McNeil, and we've talked about it elsewhere. It doesn't mean it has to be 5 megawatts, obviously. There may be locations in the city where you could do things at, a smaller scale. But something like that would be a material addition for us. He said 4-hour storage capability. James, you're a little quiet, but I heard you, 4-hour discharge capability is what he was saying.
Cool.
Yep.
Great. It's exciting. The next question is about, so, I've been following that there's this large water bond. I know that's another enterprise fund in the city, so that's sort of in its separate lane. There's also a general obligation bond. There's some things. Are we, and as, I think taxpayers and ratepayers are all paying careful attention. We just approved that large bond for the high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so is BED at any risk due to the borrowing needs of the city as a whole? We're separate. We're firewalled from
no
that.
risk. Obviously the revenue bond, the $20 million for the new revenue bond's been approved.
Yep.
It has no impact on the city's debt ratio or debt policy because we're a separate enterprise fund, separately rated. So it doesn't hinder any of those other conversations, but at the same time, those conversations don't directly affect our ratepayers, other than the fact that our ratepayers are in many cases also taxpayers, and so as you say, everyone's considering things, from a broader standpoint. But the only other piece that we've even been like kind of a part of a discussion around is really the GO bond authority that you all approve each year, that we get $3 million in general obligation borrowing through the city. There's been, some consideration about, in the future, what might come with that, if there are any sort of changes to that, and if there were, BED would definitely be interested in having a higher GO bond capacity, because once the revenue bonds are fully spent through, $3 million a year doesn't cover our kind of base capital. As we've discussed, I know Emily's done slides, it's going to be, if you had $6 million a year, for example, that would give you a much stronger base to fund kind of an annual level capital program than the $3 million. So if and when the city comes to that conversation, we would definitely be part of that conversation. But for the other bonds that you mentioned, the capital bond, the water bond, those are being undertaken by separate departments and don't have any impact on BED's ability to draw down our funding or impact our rates or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. It's the sort of the world of municipal finance is complicated to the
It is.
to the non-professional. Regarding the general obligation bond, is the city's borrowing rate more favorable than BED's borrowing rate?
The city has typically maintained a one level higher credit rating than BED, which is not unusual given we're an enterprise fund of the city. It'd be challenging, not impossible perhaps, but challenging to have us rated at or higher than the city's rating itself. So typically we've been A3 currently for the last number of years, and they're, I believe, A2. So the bond bank, on the other hand, may have an even higher rating than that. So that's why I mentioned that could be an avenue if it's favorable for all parties, where if we were able to finance through them, you might get an even better interest rate, perhaps. But so when the city issues GO bond debt at the city's kind of rating, BED ratepayers benefit modestly from that.
Thank you.
Regarding the hydroponic enterprise, I find that really interesting, and I was just curious, I'm not asking you to get into the weeds, but how you came to the decision to cite it and how open you are to other enterprises or things of that nature on the McNeil site.
It was very much an ad hoc conversation. So CETO came to us and said, hey, would you have room? We worked through it. James did some work with the folks at Village Hydroponics and with the joint owners. We were able to identify appropriate location, serve with electricity and water that could be metered appropriately and paid for by the enterprise, so there's no cost to the ratepayers. I don't know that they're necessarily interested in doing another container, for example, or I think they're sharing their story so that maybe others in other communities that are looking at this may be able to pursue it. But they actually have some more room in the container they have to kind of add additional growing capacity. So I think they're kind of very much taking it like one step at a time right now. But I think it's part of a pattern that we're hoping to establish, which is we have this energy producing site in the Intervale. We took a chunk of the Wastewood yard, converted it to the solar test center partnership with UVM, which was a great partnership. We've now kind of dedicated a small piece of land near the farmhouse at McNeil for the indoor agriculture. So these are the kinds of things we want to think about, and we want the community to think about as we look forward with McNeil and its future. It's not just about can we be more efficient, can we reduce stack emissions, can we do innovative projects. Yes, we want to do all those things, but can we have battery storage at McNeil? Can we work with nonprofits on these interesting projects, UVM on research projects? It's a really productive site. If we can do even more of these things, all the better. So yeah, we're open to kind of ideas like that. It didn't come from any structured process. It was just a great opportunity for partnership.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
The person is amazingly passionate about what he does. I recommend strongly a tour of that facility if you get a chance.
Excellent.
Okay.
Noor really likes to.
Oop, lost him.
Sorry. Noor really likes to.
Okay, cool. There we go. If there are no more questions or anything, I'll move on to the next item, which is the financial review.
Weren't we going to switch the order?
No,
later
the
on.
next two things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm out of order.
All right, so before we get into October results, Darren stole my thunder with the good news on the department's testimony filed today in the 2024 rate case. We expected it was coming, but it was nonetheless very heartening to see. So again, they recommended approval of the rate request with no adjustments, found it reasonable. I also wanted to let you know that our own financial statements are audited, but then we're also, the EEU is audited as well with us as the fiscal agent, and that you'll see in the monthly report, the external audit for that audit issued a clean, unmodified opinion of our EEU fund, which was good news. And then, as Darren mentioned, I did meet with PFM, our debt advisors, last week just to get their read on future economy and interest rates and municipal bond market, and they basically said it's extremely uncertain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I also explained, that we have a ways to go to spend down our existing construction fund from the prior bond. So we essentially just agreed to check in again in the summer and see where we are with the construction fund and see what's happened with the economy and the markets. So now getting into October FY25 results. So we had budgeted for a net loss in October, not a rec delivery month. So we'd budgeted for a net loss of $559,000. We actually had a net loss of $515,000, so we did $44,000 better than budget. Sales to customers were positive by just a tiny bit, $16,000. Other revenues also a tiny bit positive by $16,000. Most of that EEU reimbursement. In the power supply expense, net power supply expense was favorable to budget, lower expense than budget by $252,000. McNeil had been budgeted to be run, but actually was offline for all of October because we ran in September instead, and we wanted to be down for number one, economics, number two, to take care of some maintenance and work that needed to be done at the plant to get ready for the winter, and then also to move some wood around and get wood ready. So we ended up being offline, so we saved almost $500,000 on fuel as compared to budget. Transmission was a little bit over budget, and then purchase power was also over budget because no McNeil production, and also because Vermont Wind and the in-city solar produced over budget. Other operating and maintenance expense had a negative variance of $132,000. Some of that timing of expenses, a significant portion of that, however, is related to a variance we started tracking in September in the amount we had budgeted for health insurance costs, like the employer part of the health insurance, and what was actually getting spent on health insurance. And fortunately, we got to the bottom of it this week with the city. The budget is correct. That's the good news. The actuals were wrong. So we're working with the city. It turned out to just be a miscommunication in terms of what amount was put into the payroll system, which is sort of drives what expense gets posted. So we will be sort of deliberately underpaying for the rest of the fiscal year to make up for the overpayment we've had in the beginning of the fiscal year. So about by June, we'll land on target on the budget. So I know that's part of what's contributing to that $132,000 negative variance.
Can I ask a quick?
Oh, yes, sorry.
It seems not even potentially worth asking, but, and there's no major interest issue with like having overpaid and then, I mean, again, not.
Oh, like interest rate issue?
Yeah. Or like, yeah, it's probably not, it's so probably nominal that it's not a.
No,
worth discussing.
yeah, I'm not as concerned with that. I'm more concerned with,
Yeah.
if that had continued, we were looking at like over $600,000 of being off versus
Right.
budget.
Right.
So
Correct.
that was the bigger concern. So we're not going to be,
Thanks.
at least on that item. So then kind of below the line, looking at non-operating activity, other income and deductions was negative variance to budget by $138,000. Interest income was favorable by a little bit, but customer contributions and grant income timing was off, and that's what's driving that negative variance. Any questions on October before I move to or this part before I move to the next page? Okay, go down to capital. So at this point in the year, where October is it's 1/3 of the fiscal year. So you can see overall, we are 21% of the total capital budget for the year. And then I'll move down to cash. Cash is favorable to budget. Operating cash was $13.2 million at the end of October. We had budgeted to be at 11.4. Most of that variance driven by the timing of when we received the general obligation funds, so those came in October. bumping up the cash balance. And then just a bit further down, the credit rating factors, strong so far, 4.83 on the debt service coverage, 1.26 on the adjusted, 154 days with the line of credit, 90 if you don't count the line of credit. Any questions?
Yeah, can you just dig into, I'm always interested in the capital spending, and I know it's hard to line up, but I'm just curious if you can provide any more detail on, with 33% of the year elapsed and we're at 21% of spending, just curious if, maybe this is stuff that you've explained to me in past months when I've asked this question, but if you can elaborate at all, and I apologize if it's, you've already explained it.
Happy to. So on the IT budgets, I can say that when we prepare the budget, the biggest pieces of the IT capital budget are the software implementations. And typically when we put the budget together, we're either planning to do an RFP process or we're in the middle of an RFP process, and we're making our best guess about when will we have made a determination on the vendor, how long will it take to get the contract executed, and then we'll be able to actually kick off and start spending capital money.
Yep.
And I can just tell you that badly estimating or poorly estimating how long those processes would take is what's driving the delay in the IT, and that's in the general line.
Yep.
So, for example, our customer implementation, customer system, we signed that contract in October, I want to say. We had budgeted to be like already kicked off, I think, in July. We're going to kick off in January. So on the production side, that's generation. That's McNeil, Winooski 1, and the gas turbine. I think that is, for at least for the Winooski 1 dam replacement, I know it took us longer than we expected to find an installation contractor and get that work scheduled. And that's a big portion of that budget. That work is happening right now.
Okay.
And then distribution, I think last meeting Munir spoke to, we have some transformers we ordered like 2 years ago that aren't here yet. So we're still in the position of needing to rearrange projects as materials are available. And so in some cases, projects we had planned for the fall, the materials are not here to do them. And so engineering is then like pulling projects forward from the spring where they can to do work for which we do have the materials.
Do you expect to be underspent at the end of the year? And I guess as a second question, like, is this, since obviously we can't predict the future at budget time, we're making best guesses, whatever, but like, because that sort of happens every year, do you end up having like some carry forward from the prior year and it kind of all
Yes.
comes out in the wash?
Yes.
if you will?
Yes,
Okay.
and yes. I think I've done the analysis on the capital budget versus what we actually spent on capital. I think in the past 6 or 7 years, we've been like at or near budget just once. So we do typically underspend. And yes, if we do underspend, or if there's a project that doesn't get finished or doesn't get done, it typically is then just rolled forward and put in the budget for the next year. I think part of what drives that is wanting to make sure that the budget is there to do the work that we aspire to do or hope to do or think needs to get done, right? And it may be a little bit kind of overambitious, honestly, right? A little bit. I don't think it's grossly overambitious. I don't think the budget is overinflated. But I think if you're going to err on one side or the other, right, the directors and managers err on, let's try to put it in the budget because we perceive a need and feel that this work needs to be done. And then kind of life actually happens and, and sometimes new needs emerge that you didn't anticipate, and you have to say like, okay, well, we're going to fund this new need that something just broke or whatever. And because we're gonna make room in the budget for that by deferring this planned thing to the next year. So I hope that answers it.
It does, thanks, yeah. The reason I'm asking all these questions is just to make sure that we're not over budgeting for things that are costing us more than is realistic. And you gave a very straightforward and clear answer about sort of why things are done the way they are, and it makes sense, so. But yeah, thank you. And I completely understand that this is very difficult to do, and so it's easy to sit here and be like, well, the number should say this, but it's that, but I get that in the reality, it's not how it works, but just wanted to dig in on that a little bit, so thank
Yeah.
you.
And for cash flow purposes also, we budget for each month to make sure we're going to be okay. That's important, but also I care more about like the overall annual picture, right? And so the more granular you get, like the more opportunities for variance, right?
Yes.
So we see the variance every month because we're looking at it every month, and there was a budget set for every month. But even on the expense side too, like people are guessing about the timing of when the work will actually occur, and there's always lots of variance in the guess versus what actually happens. So.
Thanks, Ellen.
Any other questions? I will say it was almost a joke years ago when Daryl was sitting in the same seat that you are, that whenever he said timing issues.
Oh, yes, and Jim
we all
also.
kind of snickered because we understood that these things don't line up all the time. Great. So we're going to flip-flop some items here. Next we'll do the McNeil 2024 calendar budget. And that's Rodney and Munir. Yes. Step right up.
Hi, my name is Munir Kassi, and with me is Rodney Dollar, Director of Engineering and Maintenance. And in your packet, we included the draft calendar year 2025 McNeil budget, expense and capital. And what we'll be doing today is Rodney will be providing a summary of what's in the budget and compare it to last year. And at the end, we'll be seeking a motion to approve the budget.
So most of you, I think, are well aware at this point, since we're jointly owned at the McNeil facility, hence why we do not only a fiscal year budget, which is relevant to our internal processes, but we do a joint owner budget that is on a calendar year cycle. So the proposed calendar year 25 budget is $30,173,188, as compared to the already approved and implemented calendar year budget at $30,732,680. The biggest differences between this year's calendar year budget and the proposed calendar year budget is the fuel. So in conjunction with resource planning, we kind of reviewed what we're seeing for wood inventory numbers, and we're finding that the 397,700 tons that we were budgeting for is an overshot. So it's no question that the logging market, sawmills, things like that are also kind of feeling the effects of labor as well as supply and demand. So we adjusted that budget to 351,000 tons, but we did look at raising the price per ton to adjust. So that equated to about $1.4 million reduction. The increase on the expense side, the various parts, services, things like that, we are still seeing cost increased. So that was increased by $850,000 approximately. The capital budget for the proposed calendar year 25 is $2.36 million as compared to calendar year 24, which is about $2.8 million. That's a reduction of $438,979, and that's mostly due to less capital projects and less major high costly capital projects. That's my spiel. Happy to take any questions or address any concerns you all might have.
I just have a basic one. What's the steam expense?
Steam expense could be anything related to the boiler, auxiliary equipment.
So is it like a maintenance expense, or is it?
Yes, correct.
Okay, got it. And then there's steam expense and miscellaneous steam expense. I'm just sort of just curious about that.
It mostly comes down to the for accountings or stuff, so it'd be certain categories fall into the steam expense, mostly large steam generator boilers, any of the maintenance operations related to that. Miscellaneous is more of the auxiliary items associated with those.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions?
This is the budget for the total joint ownership or for BD's
Correct,
portion?
to accommodate the joint owners budgeting cycle, which is calendar year.
Okay.
But it's also a portion of the first half of our fiscal year as well.
So it accounts for the entire, like,
Yeah.
the other
calendar
owners
year
would be seeing the
2025,
same numbers
which is
that we're seeing.
the first half of our fiscal year 25 budget.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the wood market, what's happening? in terms of-
Yeah, right now, labor shortages is a huge thing, which is impacting pretty much every industry across the board. Plus, the wood market itself seems to be slowing down. Sawmills are just putting out, as well as, well, in fact, there's actually even instances where they're shutting down. Plus, the labor that's going into the woods is filling the labor market shortages substantially. And a lot of generational loggers are seeing the end of the line as their kids and stuff aren't getting into it. So what we're seeing for wood tons, since we are a low-grade market, is being impacted.
Other questions?
One last, I mean, it looks like the revenue section's really small. Most of their energy comes from energy sales, right? Capacity and recs. But does it square with the expenses? Oh, before depreciation, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna have to adjust the print scale. a
Yeah.
little bit.
Can you explain a little bit about informational advertising, what that typically?
I was wondering about
goes
that,
towards?
too.
Yeah.
Could account for a number of things, right now, staffing, advertising for that, as well as they could address any other stuff. I think Cataract and Manir, Darren might be able to explain a little bit more, but, yeah, I can account for any type of advertising, publications, things of that sort.
We don't really do a whole lot of advertising for McNeil, other than, we do some social media around the wastewood yard, making sure people are aware of the hours, sharing information. When we're staffed, we do tours when we can, sometimes school groups and others who are interested. And I would imagine that the main purpose, though, is we do need to hire there. So 7 days advertisements, other types of advertisements are going to take up the bulk of that line.
I have a question. So can you expand on so I guess two questions. One is this the entire McNeil budget or BED's share of the McNeil budget? Because I was unclear in your answer to Michelle.
That's the entire McNeil budget.
Okay, got it. So BED is on the hook for half of this, more or less, as 50% owner. Okay, got it. And then can you speak to the budgeted loss from last year compared to this year, and the 3.3 budgeted loss is sort of a big number, so I was just curious to sort of understand more about that.
That one actually probably have to refer to Emily and resource planning team. Those are numbers that usually provided.
Which page were you looking at, just so I can get on the same one?
Yeah, so I'm at, there's not a page number, so I'll say it's the one, memo, 2, 3,
The PDF page number?
4. Yeah, it's the third page of the actual budget.
Okay, hang on one second.
So 53 of the PDF, maybe? See the right?
Page
Sorry.
53 of the PDF?
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay, let me just pull that up.
Yeah.
Got it, okay. Yeah, and it's not, I mean, it's not atypical for the plant's expenses to be outpacing the revenues that are directly attributable from the plant. Because that goes back to the conversation we had about the plant's profit and loss versus the utility economics.
Yep.
So obviously, the higher the expense is relative to the direct revenues, that does create some sort of pressure. The question is what are we getting back in terms of the items that we covered in the spreadsheet that aren't accounted for fully here?
Right.
So it's not unusual for the plant's profit and loss to run at a negative, just like it's not unusual for BED's operating expense to potentially run at a negative, even though the net income for us is typically positive by $1 million or more. So as a reminder too, that we adopt 2 budgets essentially for McNeil because of the joint ownership. So this is the calendar year. We don't really run on a calendar year basis. So these essentially are more important for the joint owners than they are for us. For us, it's really more the fiscal year that we try to track and that we budget for. So sometimes it's not quite, it's a little apples to oranges when we look at the CY versus the FY. So you already would have approved the FY budget that takes us halfway through this calendar year, but then this looks out a little bit further.
Yep.
All things equal, would we love to see, the revenue line, outpace the expenses? Certainly. A lot of that's going to have to do with what we're assuming for energy prices, for capacity prices, for rec prices. I know that the forward energy prices this winter have actually rebounded a bit, or a little higher than they were a couple months ago, which is bad if you're exposed to the market, and it's good if you have an asset that can be in the market. So we see sometimes the inverse of what a utility might see if they were just exposed. But yeah, all of that said, at least as of kind of the latest data that we have, it continues to be kind of a net positive, more years than not. We could certainly evaluate as we go, continue to update that type of analysis, but just having the line there from the CY24 to the CY25, it could speak to whenever this was put together, what the energy forward prices looked like then versus what they look like now. So those fluctuate a little bit.
Got it. Seems like the biggest delta is in the ISO New England energy revenues is the biggest driver.
That's the forwards and
Yeah.
the forward prices.
Got it.
Any other questions? All right, if there are no other questions, I will entertain if there is a suggested motion.
Make a motion, I move that the Burlington Electric Commission approves the 2025 McNeil budget as presented.
We have a motion, to have a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. Discussion on the motion? Any? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying nay. 5 ayes, 5 ayes. Well, budget passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next item is going to be the overview of the DOE Building Giants Grant with AJ, Nate, and James.
Start by introducing the folks who will be presenting to you. I'm trying to speak up. Can you hear me okay?
Yep,
I
yeah.
can hear you.
All right, so Jay Pandy, as it is pronounced Jay, like a bird, as he reminded me when he first started, has taken the resource planner position, which was formerly Freddie's position. And Nate Gunnish is a intern through the DOE. We were awarded that internship to support the Building Giants program. So Nate's really primary purpose is to support the Building Giants deployment. Nate is our team lead from the internal staff. I vaguely recall I have some title. I have no idea what my actual obligations are at this point. I'm sure I will be told them when they arise. Emily also has a title, business lead. I don't know. So there's 4 or 5 of us that are at positions, but effectively, Jay is the principal investigator, which is a position I've been told to avoid like the plague. So with that introduction, I would like to turn it over to Jay and Nate, and they are going to give you an overview of the Building Giants program in preparation for us bringing you some contracts that will need to be approved, not today, for enabling this program. And with that, Nate, Jay, over to you.
Fantastic. Can y'all see my screen? Let's see if this button works. If not, we'll try something else.
Looks
Yes,
good.
we can
Okay,
see
there
it.
we go. We got it.
Beautiful. All right. So we'll give a bit of context on the Building Giants program, complete with a very cool federal nickname. Nate will take over for the technical side in a little bit, but first let's get a bit of context in. So, as we know from our 2030 net zero energy goals, this is going to require heat pumps on the scale of tens of thousands, which will naturally drive a change in our electric load profile. Right now, heating is Vermont's largest greenhouse gas emitter, and Burlington in particular, as Darren was mentioning earlier, the vast majority of our fuel mix in Burlington for heating is natural gas. And currently, between the cost of natural gas currently and the cost of electricity currently, it is slightly less expensive to heat your home with a gas boiler versus on Burlington's residential rate with a high efficiency heat pump. So one of the goals of Building Giants is to address this cost discrepancy. And we can do that by talking about demand response. We'll get to the graph in a little bit, but the core idea is that many of the power supply costs attached to BED are based not on how much energy we use, but on how much we use at a particular time, whatever our maximum energy demand is for a given month or for a given year. And those peak times are typically very hot summer evenings and very cold winter mornings. Energy costs are also high during those peak times. And a lot of our internal future distribution investments are based around what happens when we max out everything. And that's what we size all of our systems for. But if we look at this graph here, the orange line, which is a little bit faint, is what a normal load would look like for a house.
Hey, Jay, can you hear us? The slide is stuck on the title slide.
Huh. All right.
Sorry, just wanted to let you know.
Here we are.
Now we see it.
So, this is the slide I wanted to talk about. So, if we look at the orange line here, that orange line there is what a regular house would look like. This piece here is can you see my cursor?
Yes.
No worries. So this yellow sliver here is the peak time, but with the demand response system, we can effectively reduce a building's load during that peak time, which would lower the overall cost of BED's cost profile, and then we can transfer those savings over to our customers, improving their economics for electrifying their heating from natural gas to an electric heat pump. So the goal for the Building Giants program is to integrate these kinds of demand response systems into residential heat pumps and commercial industrial HVAC. We're looking at this over a 3-year timescale, which is the same timescale as a grant we're getting for this project. The goal is to roll out this program, to make it good, and to make it accessible to disadvantaged Burlingtonians. We want everyone to be part of this program. Which gets us to our project schedule. So all the stuff in blue, this is our phase 1 work, setting the groundwork. This work is mostly done. So we're now on to phase 2, which is all these orange bars. This is firming up contracts. This is dialing in communication materials and getting things ready for the green stage here, which is when we break out the trumpets and tell everyone we have a cool program for them to sign up. So that's the rough schedule. Nate, do you want to talk about the technology?
Happy to. So as Jay alluded to, we have both residential customers and commercial customers as part of this program. The slide on the screen is giving just a quick introduction to the technology that we'll be using in the residential program. The next slide, you'll get to see a little bit more about the CNI side of things. Essentially, the way, thank you, Ajay, the way we're doing this is, do you mind going back a slide, Ajay?
Yes.
Thank you. For residential customers, we want to be able to monitor their heat pump usage specifically, and we actually want to be able to have automated control over that heat pump usage. So the two devices that you see there are the Sensibo, which is a heat pump controller, uses infrared signals, and the Emporia View, which is a submeter for in someone's electrical panel, so that we can see how much energy they're using in their heat pump. And that allows us to keep track of the demand response initiative as we're calling those demand response events using our control of the Sensibo device. Ajay,
This
if you
would be an
like.
update of the old heat miser program, James?
Let's not even talk about that one. This is so much better.
So on the commercial side, we have a relationship with a company called Dynamic Organics, who has a lot of experience working in this space around the state. And they specialize in the same type of demand response controls that we're talking about doing with the Sensibo and Emporia, but directly building their demand response algorithm into central building energy management systems. So just as a quick run through, Sensibo, Emporia, and Dynamic Organics are our major partners here. So Ajay, if you want to bump to the next slide, I think. I will mention, here, that's the one we can talk about. So I'll mention that Dynamic Organics, Sensibo, and Emporia are the three partners that we have who we're currently working on setting up agreements with, so that, which James alluded to, these are the contracts that we're hoping to bring to you in January or February, which would allow us to access data and access the controls, protocols, and so on that each of those devices that we were presenting on allow us to use. If you want to jump back a slide, Ajay, I'll just mention that it sounds like you guys have met Freddie, or Freddie's been here before. I don't know. His name was,
We know
his
Freddie.
name was mentioned. Okay, great. So Freddie and some people on the resource planning team before Ajay and myself ran a pilot version of this program on commercial buildings like this one. So we got to guinea pig with ourselves, and on residential buildings of people who had relationships with BED. So I think Darren was involved in that. So again, people we could easily guinea pig with. And essentially the big takeaway there that I just want to emphasize is that the technology works, right? We worked with Sensibo, Emporia, and Dynamic Organics. We had successful relationships. We were able to use the technology the way we wanted to, and we're hoping to continue with those three partners and just scale up to this larger program of the 1,500 residential customers and 45 commercial customers. Again, this pilot project worked very well, so we want to be able to continue those relationships so that we can continue to have success over the life of this program.
So that's the long and short of this program. There is nothing actionable right now, but we want to make sure this is upcoming in the pike so that you're not surprised when we start asking about these contract agreements in January and February. Any questions while we're here?
Yeah, so do we have 1,500 customers? And is this also a program, and if you could elaborate on how we would grow to that number if we aren't already there? And then B, it sounds like it's a two-pronged approach. If I'm looking at this right, if we're not already at 1,500 or more customers, we're trying to grow to that point, and B, get as many of those people to adopt us implementing some of this technology in their homes, and what incentives are we offering to do that?
Yeah, sir.
Yes.
Ajay, you want to take it?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's start with the commercial industrial, because these two tracks work in parallel, but they'll have different marketing and implementation structures. So with commercial and industrial, that 45 number is a rough guess because there's a wide variety of differences in size within our commercial customers. So it's a matter of especially for very much larger customers, going to them directly and saying, here's our option. There will be a number attached to it once we hand them an offer. And so we'll effectively be incentivizing them to integrate this demand response schema into their existing building automation tool set. And that'll be a longer process per commercial customer, and it will look a little differently for every single one of them in terms of what it plugs into and what we ask them to do with that demand response. So those will all be a little bit different and specific because that's just how commercial buildings often work out. With the residential side,
Heat pump technology?
So just to be clear, we have over 2,400 heat pumps
Okay.
in the
all
city.
right.
Yeah.
So we got the numbers.
So we do have the potential base.
Okay.
Yep.
yes. And with the residential side, we're looking at two kinds of customers. One set of customers that already have heat pumps, and then we just plug in this cool set of technology into their existing heat pump system, and it works just fine on its own. But there's also going to be a separate class of customer who is thinking about getting a heat pump. And our goal with that prong of marketing is to have this be part of the deal of you're looking at getting a heat pump. Here's something that sweetens the deal for you. If you install this with your heat pump, it'll go into a cool program and it'll help you save more. And in that case, there is a pilot rate that has been approved that, if I remember correctly, will be you integrate into the system, and then you get a bill credit if you consistently meet the load control systems.
So, Jay, just a note, it's been approved at the local level, not at the state level yet, nor has it been filed at the state level.
Okay.
The pilot rate has an 18-month window, and we don't want to burn that window of time until we're actually in the place of deploying devices and ready to accept them.
Does that clarify things?
You got to get that pool of people to say yes first.
Right.
And get then hand out all the devices or the software or whatever it is. And then,
So a combination of factors. One, as you mentioned, as you alluded to, we will have the incentive through the pilot rate that
Yep.
Ajay is talking about. We also are currently, if you remember the orange bars on the Gantt chart up there, one of those objectives for that we're taking on right now is essentially customer segmentation for marketing purposes. So we've been working closely with our community outreach team and our marketing team so that we can start putting together the materials that we'll need to do that targeted outreach. We're looking at a variety of different groups, groups of first movers, people who have both heat pumps and electric vehicles. We think they're a good target. As Ajay mentioned earlier, we also have targets to reach maybe non-traditional communities for this type of program. So working again with our community outreach team to make sure that we have strategies for getting into, for example, large multifamily buildings that have a lot of heat pump units in them, so that we can make sure that we have penetration across the city, across different demographic groups. So really, to answer your question, that's currently a process that we're working on right now, is developing those marketing materials and figuring out who to reach out to, in what order, and how to target that marketing specifically to them.
And also, this is a piece where the federal government, the federal grant side helps, because as part of this project, we're getting technical support from the Department of Energy. We're getting linked up with other utilities doing similar kinds of work. So we're going to be pulling in lessons learned about how to reach out to multiple kinds of customers to get that outreach as wide as possible.
And I just want to mention one quick thing on customer segmentation. We can occasionally get lazy and talk about this as a residential and commercial program. Really, the distinction occurs as to how the systems are controlled. So if they are residential customers in a building with a central building management system controlling the heating units, they'll actually go probably through the dynamic organics side of the program, even though they're, quote, residential customers. So, but by and large, the Sensibo Emporia view structure works for single family dwellings or dwellings where the customer has thermostatic control of their own heat pump.
To be a residential customer to use the Sensibo and Emporia technology. So, let's say you have a large commercial building that generally has some kind of central system, but there's one office in the front. I know this can happen sometimes. Large industrial buildings will have a front office with just a heat pump to get some air conditioning to the people who work there. they could also fall into this part of the program as well.
I have a couple of questions. So the first one is, I thought transportation was the number one source of greenhouse gases in
Yeah, me
Vermont.
too.
It is, for our net zero roadmap, buildings is considered the number one, buildings thermal, because we created two categories for transportation, kind of in city residents who drive wherever they go, and then visitors. And when you take visitors out, because we don't have a lot of control over how they charge or their incentives, then buildings is kind of number one in the roadmap. But it is true in Vermont that transportation's the highest.
Okay, I think maybe it was AJ, I don't know, but I think it was said that it was from statewide. But anyways, that's a little bit beside the point. But I did notice that, of course. So I'm curious, like, also your slide said weatherization is better. And you're gonna target, your first round is gonna be people with EVs and heat pumps. To me, that's high income. Also newer housing, like old houses don't accommodate heat pumps as well. And so I'm curious how much this project costs, and if it's not the best way forward. Seems like, and all this technology projects, they always end up so oriented towards higher income individuals. And you can say that you have a focus on Justice 40, but until you really know how to do that, it gives me pause.
Yeah, thanks
Yes.
for bringing that up. I do just want to mention quickly that I only referenced the EV folks as an example of customer segmentation. We're working on a variety of
No, we
different
didn't,
subsets as well.
did not say we were focusing on EV customers first.
You said that was one of the criteria for
No,
identifying
we didn't.
potential.
It's just a market segment.
Okay. But anyways, yeah, so I think that's a real concern. I don't know how much ratepayers are paying for this grant program. So I'm also curious about that as well, like how much is coming from the feds and how much is it ratepayer money?
Yes,
It
the
is
current
essentially a 50% contribution from the federal government.
So just a little extra context for the Justice 40 piece of it. Of the heat pump rebates, I mentioned we have over 2,400 heat pumps. We've done, latest report, 1377 through Tier 3, so those are fairly recent. Some of the other ones are from efficiency projects, so some date back to 2015, 2014. But so of the 1377, we have 180 were low moderate income customers, just for context. So we do have a good group.
How many, 180?
180. So we've had pretty consistently about 14 to 15% of the heat pump rebates are going to low moderate income customers. And with EVs, it's been a little higher. In fact, I think it's almost at 25% for the EVs, which is great. And then the Justice 40 obviously is a little different because it's not just about income, but it's also about areas. And so we know that the Old North End, downtown, and portion of the South End are considered Justice 40 districts because they're either disadvantaged historically, they have environmental contamination, or different pieces. So part of this is making sure that the money, obviously, for the program and the pilot and the benefits can go to some of our low moderate income customers, which I think we can definitely do, but then also that we're targeting deployment in parts of the city that are considered under the Justice 40 criteria. So some of it's geographic and some of it's income-based, I think, is just one way to think about it.
Right, no, that makes sense. I mean, I think it's also, those are the neighborhoods that are gonna be the hardest to advance as well, right? Because it's got the oldest housing stock.
In some
And
cases,
many
yeah. I mean,
broken up housing and apartments and,
we do have some interesting, like, all-electric new residential buildings in some of those areas. I think about, like, in the downtown, for example, and also parts of the South End that are in the Justice 40, where each unit has a heat pump. And if we were able to get a program like this, not only would you get a bunch of folks signed up all at once who are renters, who don't always get to benefit from our programs, and if they're paying the electric bill, they get the bill credit just for signing up. But then that's also a nice peak reduction if you're able to optimize that usage over the course of a building. I mean, then you start to get into things which I don't think we're quite talking about here, but like, helping to lower demand on a particular circuit if we're starting to get overloaded at peak times. So there's some really interesting utility benefits that, to be clear, benefit all ratepayers. But the goal over the long run here would be to have something for heat pumps that mirrors what we have for EV drivers. Where it's not just a bill credit, but it's a rate. Obviously, this is a pilot to get us the information, the data that would help us get to that point. But the idea here would be that if you're a heat pump user you're going to pay less to run that heat pump, and we're going to make it more competitive against natural gas, which has a price advantage now, in exchange for us being able to access a little bit of demand reduction during peak times. So think of defeat the peak, but in a way that's way more controllable and way bigger impact for the utility. So I think there could be some really interesting applicability. But what we know, and I can say as one of the 10 pilot customers, is there's a benefit just to being a part of it, because now, like my heat pumps, I can control from my phone, which I could never do before. I had a remote, and I'd have to be in the room and press the buttons. So just by signing up, if you get the Sensibo devices, just to start with, you're going to be able to say, okay, I'm coming home. My heat pump's not on. I want it to be on, or I want cooling, or I want heating in a particular room, or maybe the whole building. And you can set your temperature. You can set schedules. It's much more granular. It tells you when you need maintenance. So there's a whole host of benefits to the user of the heat pump. And then for us as a utility, at least the periods of time where we piloted it with Freddie, it was really not obtrusive for the user to get the peak reduction. You'd get an alert that says, hey, we're going to have a peak day. We're going to adjust by 2 or 3 degrees during this 2 or 3 hour window. And, in some cases, they try to pre-cool or preheat if they could, so that you're not really even seeing much of an impact if you're in the room. So I think it's a really interesting project. I think you make a good point. Like, we have the challenge, which I think we accept and want to take on, of making sure that we can roll it out equitably, that we're reaching renters and homeowners, as well as the commercial side, obviously, and that we're doing not just the minimum for Justice 40, but everything we can do in terms of those areas of the city and our low moderate income customers. The other piece I'd add is we're not limited just to the universe of folks who have a heat pump today. So we've definitely kind of considered whether there's a partnership between us and maybe VGS can support this as well, where anyone getting a new heat pump, we can try to get them signed up right away. Let's get them a Sensibo device, let's get the Emporia, let's give them these controls, kind of right away. So there'd be a new universe of customers over time.
And Darren, if I may, we also have ongoing conversations with Champlain Housing Trust and some of the other affordable housing groups in the city, just to make sure that we're working actively with them. We've engaged with them very early in this project so that wherever we can allow this program to help out, the folks that they're working with, we're already having those conversations early with them. Outside of just the housing stock, we're also having conversations on workforce development as well. So trying to make sure this reaches a large swath of the population, not just the people you're talking about. So, as Darren alluded to, there's a lot of benefits long-term if we can get this right to keeping rates down through demand response. That, of course, affects everybody, but specifically trying to work with some of those affordable housing developers and as well, just to make sure that we can engage everybody early.
So looks like it's a 3-year project?
Yeah, the grant is for 3 years.
The grant is for 3 years, but we are probably going to be seeking contract approval for 5, because obviously the intent of having rolled out this many devices and control systems is not to have it end at the end of the grant. So 5 years tied to your approval authority and gives us continuity past the end of the grant to operate the devices and to control the buildings.
There benchmarks or something along the way that you go after a year, after 2 years, after where do we stand? Have we met goals that
Yes, there are.
reevaluate?
Yeah, there are reporting metrics for the federal government under the grant that include things like devices deployed, savings per device deployed, cost per device deployed, level of outreach, by Justice 40. All of that kind of stuff is part of our federal grant reporting, and we can certainly share it.
Of course, at the end of the 3-year period. So, we can certainly make sure you get
Would
those.
hope to see.
Trust me, it's federal
See you
money.
guys
The
again,
reporting
yeah.
will be voluminous.
Is this anticipated to be the number of call events aligned to peak event calling, or is it probably more, or?
I think if you were thinking about defeat the peak versus,
Yes.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this would be more of a monthly kind of cycle as opposed to an annual cycle. So defeat the peak happens just during a couple months during the summer, but I think to get maximum value here, we'd probably have a few events each month.
Right, because it'd be.
Okay, or more.
Right.
Yeah, this is definitely an ongoing monthly activity to capture monthly peaks, annual peaks, all of that.
it from being too burdensome for any customers, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there's a limit on how many peaks we could call per month, just to make sure we're not playing with your HVAC system every day of the month. But it's something like, the limit is something like 5 per month that we're allowed to call. Thank you, Ajay. Is setting that rule on ourselves essentially, but basically to make sure that for customers. So I think we'll have a similar question as they're signing up. You know, how often are you going to do this?
Right.
There is a limit, but it will be happening all year round. It will be happening on a monthly basis.
That makes sense. And just to say it, I mean, having, it's been, the industry's been looking for these types of devices and having them be proven out, and these both the residential products and as well as dynamic organics in state have been tested and tried and true. So it's a good mix for sure. And the other thing I'll just say too is for being able to flex the load and manage the load, either through resilience, although less of an importance thing for the city. It's a nice thing to have in your back pocket if you have to be able to understand constraint or any other things that happen, that can happen. So that's great.
Other questions? And do we have any more from you?
Nothing from me.
Yeah, this sounds like I'm looking forward to seeing how, you know, just the information at the very least that we can get out of this.
Yeah.
And just for expectation, I think the idea was we'd come back sometime in the next couple of months with an agreement on the commercial side. So maybe, I don't know about January, maybe February, we'll have a agenda item on that.
Great. Thanks, Darren. Yeah, we are looking at the contract with Dynamic Organics as well as data licensing agreements, kind of a separate ballgame, but as well for January or February to bring back to you guys.
Great. Awesome.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Have fun.
Thanks.
Alrighty. Yeah. Great presentation. We'll move on to number 9, our last item. Commissioners check-in. Any last, anything we haven't covered that's come up in your heads in the past hour and a half or so that we want to clean up before we go?
I have a very quick one. I was just looking at my calendar. The date is, are we on the first Wednesday in January? I'm just looking at the date of the
We'd be on the 8th.
January meeting. We are on the 8th. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, right, because the 1st is a Wednesday. So it's a little early in the month.
Is that okay? Or
Yes.
no conflicts? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't calendar it wrong. And
Tentatively, we're also planning to roll out some of our updates on incentives that same day. So we'll be able to update you that evening on some of those hopefully exciting updates. Great.
I got one question that I think I'll keep asking again and again because it's bugging the hell out of me.
Okay.
Is the time of use on your EV chargers, the 10 o'clock till midnight. Is there? And I'm hoping to keep hear some movement on that at some point to where it's flexible and where we stand on that, because it's, I don't know about anybody else, but it drives me crazy.
I don't know if, James, I don't know if you heard that from Chair Moody, just asking about whether or where we might be in terms of considering the ability to have a more dynamic number of hours for the EV rate. I know we've talked about it a little bit in the past.
We are working to migrate over to that. It's a question of making sure we can implement it across the broader segment of the population. But it has been tested, and Casey is working right now to start moving customers over to that. Now, whether, again, that doesn't mean necessarily tomorrow, but it's imminent. We will start giving customers the dynamic option. I will actually have to check and see precisely where it stands in deployment, but we're working on it actively. So we already did our rates in a modular fashion. So all we have to do is say, as of whenever, this device is now eligible for dynamic control, and customers can elect to do that. But we want to communicate to customers too, so that they know that they can elect to change and stuff. And that's really what I have to check about, is where the communication and whether we were going to pre-communicate before we made the change. That's all I would have to check, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, and is that something that has to go through the PUC? No, that's.
Nope, this is where I wanna say we did get really clever. Sometimes you get the bear, sometimes the bear gets you. We had a rate approved that said you have 3 options. You can elect any option for which there are approved devices. Adding or removing approved devices does not go to the PUC. That's just done on our website. So basically, we created a plug and play. It's the first time it's ever been done, as far as I know. But basically, by saying, okay, this device is okay for this rate, this device is okay. You know, we could remove the packetized devices when they took them off the market. We don't have to go back to the PUC for that. It doesn't change the underlying rate structure or what customers are compensated or anything like that. It just says we can address these devices this way or not. Now, obviously, we don't want to pull devices that customers are relying on. That's not our choice, right? You know, so like in the packetized energy case, we pulled packetized energy devices, but then attempted to get the customers' charge point devices, which were still on the list. So I will follow up on that, though.
Awesome. Does anybody else have an EV that, no?
I mean, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, it's just, for myself, it's just annoying to know that after 12 noon, I have to wait till 10 o'clock at night to put my car back on to get the rate. I'd rather be able to put it on whenever, and if they choose to knock it out or whatever when they want to, fine, but I can always have a charged car. I don't know. I'm always playing the game, and I'm tired of playing the game.
Well, you could always get a level 1 charger for those hours in between if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it came with the but. All right, anything else? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor of adjourning indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by indicating nay. Ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you for joining us, everybody.